I'm Alderman Jared Littmann, and now that I'm no longer on the City Council, I will be listening to more episodes of the Maryland Crabs.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
It's the Maryland Crabs.
It is.
We're done with Thanksgiving.
How was yours?
I was in Pennsylvania.
So how was it? I guess does that answer that?
That's pretty much it. In Western PA, it was cold. It was a high of like 29. So our winters here are really not that bad, as much as we complain. My mother grew up in Maryland. If you tell her that our winters aren't bad, she gets almost offended. And our winters are really cake.
They really are. They really are. No, I had a good one. I made my turkey for 2 years in a row and didn't screw it up, so I'm good.
What's the screw up? You put it in the oven and the little popping thing comes out?
No.
They say you're not supposed to do that, though. They say that the popping thing comes out at 180, and your bird's cooked at like so you want to get it at 165, so you should take it out at like 155 because it continues to cook. So that's why you should get a digital thermometer, not rely on a little poppy thing.
No, I don't. We get a fresh turkey.
What, you kill it yourself?
Yeah, go out and, only one of them gets pardoned at the White House, the other one, they set them free. My uncle used to do that when we were a kid. He had a farm, and it would be like, everyone was like, oh, yeah, the turkey's great. He says, oh, yeah, the son of a bitch was really hard to catch this morning, and he used to kill us. We were like, oh, Uncle Drew, hi.
I have a friend of mine. She owns an organic turkey farm out in Portland or outside Portland, and she'll on Facebook, or she'll send me videos, and I look at all these turkeys, and I think it's just that old maximum that a lot of something is just like really creepy. Like a puppy's cute, but like 1,000 puppies is kind of creepy.
Gross, yeah.
So you look at all these turkeys, and they're all kind of creepy, and you look at them, and they just don't know that they're about to die, but they look delicious.
Yep. I love turkey, but I only like it twice a year. It's strange. Very rarely will I get it outside of Christmas.
No one does.
Thanksgiving.
I think no one does that. Why not? I mean, it's a delicious meal, so why not have it in March?
Do you eat other things on Thanksgiving and Christmas besides turkey?
So with my in-laws, it's funny, I realized this when we moved. We lived in New Mexico for a few years, about 5 or 6 years, and down there...
I thought you lived in Montgomery County.
I grew up there. But in New Mexico, they have enchiladas with their Thanksgiving meal. So you have your Thanksgiving turkey and everything, and you have enchiladas. And so I think depending where you live, it's a different Thanksgiving. Mine is like your typical white suburban Thanksgiving that you see in movies. It's not like that.
Northeast
right.
U.S.
But in Pennsylvania, they do a turkey and a ham, which I like.
Oh, I like ham, but I think I'm a traditionalist turkey.
If it's in front of you, you're going to eat ham, though. I mean, if you're at Thanksgiving, because there's a ham here, you're going to have ham.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally would. I mean, I wouldn't be offended if I went to somebody's house and they had it. But my kids sometimes say, we just had turkey on Thanksgiving. I say, shut up. We're having it for Christmas, too.
Right. Well, we do beef tenderloin, but we do that. So my mother does that like on Christmas Eve, or we do it the week before with my in-laws. They come down. We have beef tenderloin, and then we have it a week later at my mom's for like Christmas Eve. So by the time... we're done with the New Year's. I'm pretty much done with all the rich foods and everything like that, but I'm looking forward to it now.
Bring it on. Hey, big thank you to Jerry Walker again for coming in for our episode last week.
Yeah, he came in the clutch.
Yes, he did. Nice guy. Real nice guy. I wish him luck in his race for delegate in District 30.
It'll be fun to watch at any rate. That's going to be ugly.
It will. It was interesting. Red Maryland, they were broadcasting live from the Republican convention 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and they had Jerry Walker in, and then they also had right behind him was Tony McConkey. and Tony was just weaseling out of it. He was like, oh, well, we just, we want to make sure that we protect the seats, and it was kind of funny. And then Steve Shue came in like right after me. They set up at the convention up at Rundle Mills at one of the hotels there, and they just paraded politicians right in front of them. Sit down, have a few words, I
was at an event once, and I had to sit literally right between Barbara Samarazek and Janet Owens, who did not like each other. They disliked each other intensely, and they didn't even pretend to like each other. It was just very cold. So I'm trying to make awkward conversation, and neither of them were having it. All three of us just stared straight ahead.
Janet Owens, I had met her 3 or 4 times. horrible chain smoker.
Yeah, she used to smoke in her office, from what I understand. And here, so we used to be coming down like Bay Ridge Road in Eastport, or Bay Ridge Ave, rather. And
I get that confused all the time.
I always remember that she had a driver. It was a cop. And I always remember that they would bypass all the traffic, that they would zoom past everyone, like, weaving in and out like it was
an emergency.
And I just always remember seeing her, like, sitting in the back, like you get a glimpse of her working on papers and smoking while the car flew down Bay Ridge.
I remember I was at a dedication for a ball field or something like that, sort of late in her term, and it looked like Cheech and Chong's van when the state guy or the county cop gets out, opens the door, and it just seemed like there was like this little puff of smoke that came out the door.
It's kind of weird to see people smoke anymore. I mean, I used to smoke, but I mean, I quit, years ago. But it just, whenever you see anyone over the age of like 30 smoking, it's just weird because you just figure it's fallen out of favor so much.
We talked about that 2 weeks ago when I was at the Moose Lodge. Like I told you about last episode, we had no smoking in the building, and we watched the Free Range Improv show, and then we walked out, but there was like this patio which had plastic, I guess, weatherproofing stuff to keep the cold out. But everyone went out there and was smoking, but that was our exit. And we walked through this mist of smoke, and we were all of us were like, "Oh my God, dude, forget."
But I mean, when I go to Pennsylvania, like I did for Thanksgiving, you can still smoke in all the bars up there. I mean, it's like 1970, so all the bars you can still smoke because there's some loopholes and stuff like that about serving food and a percentage and everything like that.
Yeah, and I think there has to do with size.
Right, they all still smoke, and it just seems so antiquated. But then I'm thinking that's how it always was when I was growing up. Like I remember we'd fly to Ireland, and my grandmother would be smoking in the plane. You go to the mall, people smoking at the mall. At my college, growing up, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a non-smoking section in the cafeteria, and everywhere else you could smoke. And just now, I've become one of those annoying ex-smokers where it just bothers me.
I don't say anything. I mean, I agree, but you walk through and you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of crazy. Hey, we got a few phone calls, or not phone calls, but we've got a few emails on our offer the other week about possibly coming in as a third mic.
Oh, yeah, we need a third mic. We got some people, not that we're discounting people who've already contacted us, but we're just trying to expand our horizon, just see who's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I say they weren't flowing in. I mean, we got two, but it was
still.
But yeah, no, I mean, we explain what it is, what's involved. Some people, want to know. I mean, it is time consuming to a degree. It's not.
Yeah, this is actually.
You're not going to be out. It's not a 40-hour thing.
But yeah,
unless you're Tim, but then you obsess incredibly.
It does take me a long time to edit, just because I go over every word, every pause, every hesitation. John's like, "You done yet?" I'm like, "No, I've only been working on it for 4 hours."
We'll get it tomorrow. But yeah, no, if you're interested in possibly joining us, send us an email, info@themarylandcrabs.com. And
yeah, we're just trying to mix it up. We're trying to have just kind of alternate it so that if I have to miss or John has to miss, it's not a substitute. It's just we just want to kind of add on to this and maybe expand our podcast horizons. Get someone in here that maybe they want to do something different than Maryland Crabs, and this is a great place to learn it. I always say that we're not going to teach you how to do it. We're going to teach you how we do it. Not saying
that's true. That is true. But this week, Jared Littmann.
Yeah, and we're doing something that normally we'll do an interview and then we'll do the intro and outro all at once after we do the interview, so we know what we did. This is the one time that we have not interviewed Jared yet. He's here. He's going to be due here any minute now, and so we don't know how it went. So we could say it was a great interview, but maybe he snaps in the middle of it and just starts throwing stuff around the room.
Wouldn't that be great?
That would be awesome.
That would be great. Do you think we could get him to do that?
He is the most even-tempered person I know. I've only seen him lose his temper once, and it didn't dawn on me that he lost his temper till halfway through.
I get pretty close when James Appel was pulling that shit in the...
Actually, no. There was a couple times you could see him in council that he was really torqued. He's just not as immature about it as we are when we're mad. He keeps it all in check.
That is true. But we're gonna talk to him about the legislation that he's passed, the legislation that no, we're not. We're gonna try to figure out what it takes to be a legislator.
Right.
From the behind the scenes, behind the curtain, from a guy that ran a hardware store.
Yep.
And somebody somehow, I'd like to know how he got.
But let's face it, he is a little smarter than the average person. He's far smarter than I am. So I mean, it's not like I ran for something. I mean, he's an attorney.
He's a little. Yeah, I know. We don't like to mention that. We got to hold that.
He's an environmental attorney, so it's kind of like it cancels each other out. So it makes him a nice guy. And he's an all-around nice guy. I got to be honest with you. So when I saw him going into the election, and I'll probably mention this in the interview, but I thought as he was going in, I've seen people go in with all the best intentions and come out kind of filthy on the other side. And when I saw him going in, I'm like, bye, guy. See you on the other side. And I'm telling you, he came out the same way he went in. He never did anything shady, never did anything that was. I've never heard anyone talk smack about him.
No, but he also learned how to navigate, from what I can see. And you had mentioned that you had ran into Fred Payon at a fundraiser, because that's how you roll. When he said that Jared, came in as this, green, not knowing anything, and he's really sort of evolved into a politician.
He didn't say it meanly. He said it, but I think that's the ability to compromise, the ability to gain support for legislation, to wheel and deal. I mean, there's a lot of that. That I think naively you go in thinking it's going to be Mr. Smith, and you realize that there's a lot of compromise. That you ask for more than you want. That's the only time that I see when people argue against term limits, where they say, it takes you a full term just to understand the process and to understand everything. So I'm not a big fan of 2- and 3-term elected officials, but I do see there's a value to learning the system, and it takes you a while to navigate that to the point going, all right, my second term I can really be effective because I understand how it works.
That makes sense. I was at Caliente the other night and speaking with a girl who was just very, very upset that Mayor Panelides had lost. And I said, it wasn't. I told her why I thought he lost, and it wasn't really a surprise. But we both sort of came to the consensus that is 4 years enough time to really leave your mark on a city as a mayor?
Yeah,
and it may or may not be. And certainly we'll know with Mayor Buckley in a short time. We'll see in 4 years whether he's got what it takes for a second term. But I said I don't think everybody is mandated a second term, but I think that they should have a really good shot at it, because I agree with you. I think that there's a lot that can be accomplished in 8 years. There's very little that can be accomplished in just 4.
Well, I think, but you also look at the motivation behind that if you're going for a second term and you know that going into their first term, you're going to be very careful. You're not going to, because you're basically under scrutiny for the next election, so you're going to be careful as to what you do and how you do it. Whereas when you get elected for the second term, I think that's where all presidents really kind of make their mark. You look at Clinton, you look at Obama, and so these were presidents that they had no F's to give. So I mean, at that point, that they can get into it, and they don't. Not that they don't care, but they can take risks. But you look at Josh in his second term, and I think that he was really picking up after the financial collapse of 2008, 2009, and we're still feeling the effects of that now, 10 years later. But I think that you look at Mike and say, what could he have done? What would he have done? I don't think it's owed to anybody, but at the same time, I think you generally see a big difference between the first and second terms.
I think with Mike, with a 2.5 to 1 party opposition against him, he couldn't do anything controversial in his first term.
No.
And
he was very careful not to.
And you had to be really good. I mean, you had to have the Democrats saying, oh my gosh, where the hell has he been hiding all these times, to win this election, I think.
Right.
And they weren't. I mean, I told him, I spoke with him after the election. I said, you were a good mayor. Are you going down as the history of the greatest? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think we have anybody that is going down as that in Annapolis. But I said the Democrats, nobody was screaming to get you the hell out.
But I think everyone thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was for that reason.
And nobody was screaming to keep you in. And when you have a 2.5 to 1 deficit on voter registration, and that's what I think really cost you.
But back to Jared, so I can't tell you the number of people I've run into saying, what's the next move for him? Why isn't he running again? And we'll talk to him about that. But he was very effective by all measures. Kind of take it for a grain of salt because we're his friend too. But I think we could be honest and say, well, he could have learned to do this, he could have learned to do that. But I mean, he caught on very quickly. But I think it's just a lot of it was that lawyer training and that clarity of thought. He's very detail oriented. But I think it'll be fun to see what it's like behind the curtain.
It is. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get back into it with soon-to-be former Alderman Jared Littmann.
All right.
When a ring from the United States Naval Academy comes into Zachary's for a center stone, it always makes us wonder, where's this one going? Where's this one been? A nuclear sub in the North Atlantic? A carrier deck in the South Pacific? The moon? 52 astronauts are Academy graduates, from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, Corregidor to the Coral Sea, Midway to the Persian Gulf, Congress to the White House. These rings go where America goes. 73 that went to war were awarded the Medal of Honor. But wherever they go, wherever they may serve, our admiration goes with them.
Zachary's. Online at zacharysjewelers.com. More than a jewelry store, a jeweler.
Very few things in life are so precious and so irreplaceable that we all must do our part to protect them. The Chesapeake Bay is one of those things. You can do your part by contributing to the Chesapeake Bay and Endangered Species Fund. It's that little line item you'll see at the very end of your Maryland tax return. Any amount you give makes a difference, and it's tax deductible. I'm Peter Francho, Maryland Comptroller. Our bay and rivers thank you. Learn more about the Chesapeake Bay Trust at cbtrust.org.
Welcome back, Alderman, soon-to-be ex-Alderman Littmann.
I don't think X is the right term. I think you're supposed to use former. X implies something wrong.
We don't have to call you like the Honorable, do we?
Or Aldermanic
I'm not sure
Emeritus.
Started that, so...
Yeah, we never did. Your Excellency.
Welcome to the Alderman Uncut version of of the Maryland Crabs podcast.
You do have a spring in your step now.
I'm enjoying the moment. It was a great run, and I'm so glad I did it. It was very engaging, but I'm very comfortable with the decision not to run again.
So what we wanted to do actually is, rather than go over the legislative victories and all those things and rehash the politics of it, we wanted to get into something we've never talked about before, which is the reality of running for office and being in office. Because I was thinking about that. I was thinking about this years ago. Remember?
So you're asking the one alderman who didn't have any competition in his one race to tell you what it's like.
But
to
he had an
run for
outstanding campaign.
I'm not talking about strategies, but I'm talking about. I remember years ago. Remember Sonny Bono? He was congressman and somewhere, and then he died, and his wife ran for office. And I always thought,
and we're thankful you didn't run into a tree.
Well, I appreciate that. So am I.
Yeah, Marlene would run for Ward 5 after that.
Right.
But
yeah, I don't think so.
But I always thought about people who have no experience, and they suddenly decide that they're going to run for office. And I was saying a lot of the podcasts I listen to right now are political podcasts, and they're talking about a groundswell, and they're saying, just don't support politicians, elected officials, just run for whatever it is. And I thought about the practicality behind that, going, I'm relatively bright. I mean,
you're bright.
Average, but could I do what I've seen people who don't seem as bright seem to do, which is not only get elected, but they get into office, and you don't think about just the day-to-day, like what's it's like your first council meeting. How do you know what's going on? Do you, when you have to sit down and write legislation, how does that happen? And I guess for some people, just they don't write legislation.
Well, I'd like to step back I remember you were appointed into this position initially.
Yes.
How did you come to become appointed?
So my predecessor resigned the position after 3 years into his 4-year term. The city code provides that if there's a vacancy with less than 15 months before the next regular election, then the central committee of the party of the person who resigned picks the new person.
Right.
And since Matt Silverman was a Democrat, the Democratic Annapolis Central Committee picked the candidates. And I read about it in the paper that Matt resigned, and that he was from Ward 5 and the process that I just described. And so I looked up on the computer to see what ward I lived in, since I wasn't aware. Saw that I lived in Ward 5, and I was interested.
So you didn't know Matt?
I didn't know Matt. I didn't know what ward I lived in. I didn't have any. I didn't have a list of city issues that I wanted to try to target. But I did have. I wouldn't say I had no political experience in that I had worked on a couple of campaigns in the past. I had worked in the city of Paterson in New Jersey. I worked in the mayor's office for a summer as an intern. I maintained an interest in politics and public policy. My undergraduate degree is actually engineering and public policy. So I've always had an interest in public policy. I never had political office before this job, but I didn't have it wasn't the first time I had an interest in it.
What was the moment? You're just at work, you're at lunch break, the moment where it happens, and you're looking online and you see this and you're like, huh.
Well, it was at home, to be that specific, but I do remember it was a period of time where my kids were not infants anymore, so my youngest at the time was 3 years old, still young and still certainly time intensive, but not the intensity of a newborn. And I did have this interest, and I had been in my business career at that point for about 10 years or so, and so I've always been someone who likes new challenges and was ready for a new challenge, so it just came along at the right time. I talked to Josh Cohen, who was then mayor, about what the position was like, and it was within the understanding of what I thought it would be. And so I submitted my name. Kitty Higgins, who was the chair of the Central Committee, said I was the only one that had ever gotten people in the neighborhood or the community to write letters on my behalf to say, hey, I know Jared Littmann in a business context or whatever context, and I think you'd be a good person.
Well, see, I mean, you're an attorney, so and just knowing you, like we know you, you're pretty exacting, and you're right. So you're going to not just go by the book, but you're going to go kind of about, I mean, you're pretty organized. And
the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
The publisher from Annapolis projected that a different candidate would win, and that I was unknown at that point. And
he has got a record for his predictions that maybe not.
Yeah, it's hit or miss. What the hell? I admit that. That's fine. But I mean, and you, how many were in contention? I know
there were 4. So Arnold Smith and Tracy McGranagan and John Giannetti and myself. And so
who were the person? Arnold Smith and who?
Tracy McGranagan. She lives across from the Pitmoyer Rec Center, and her main issue focus has been the Milkshake Lane development.
Because I do remember the interviews and the public interviews over at Pitmoyer.
Right.
Sitting around that big square table, and why you and everything else, and ultimately you came out ahead. I think it came down pretty much to you and John Giannetti, didn't it?
It was on the first vote. John Giannetti got 1 vote from Chuck Weichel, and Arnold Smith got 1 vote, I think from Rhonda Pindell Charles actually, and then I got the rest of the 5 votes. So I won 5 to 1 to 1 on the first ballot.
All right, so you got in. And then was it kind of one of those things that you got it and you're like, what the hell am I doing?
So it was a lot of trying to figure it out. And so the immediate crush, and this will happen is probably happening now for all the newcomers, is that there's an immediate crush of people who, especially if they don't know your positions, and no one knew my positions on anything. They knew I was a business owner, they knew I was a lawyer, and they knew I was a Democrat. I was kind of like publicly, that's all people knew. And so there's an immediate crush of people who want to talk to you, because either they're trying to figure you out or they're trying to lobby you on their issue, why their issue is so important that you need to take it up and be the leader of that new cause.
So people are wandering into the store, or they're calling you at the store, or they're...
Ton of emails, ton of phone calls, ton of appointments. Can I meet with you? Certainly in the store too, but people were pretty respectful as far as not expecting, if they're going to run into me as a customer, that I'm going to have a half an hour to talk to them. I will have, and I did have, a lot of those 5-minute conversations, and they were really fascinating and interesting, and I learned so much about the city that I didn't know. I didn't know how much I didn't know, but you get a really quick education.
Well, how plugged in were you to like the city politics before all that?
I wasn't at all. So I knew Josh Cohen not because he was mayor, but because both of our kids went to the same daycare, and I think a different set of matching kids went to the same dance hall. So I would see Josh at those 2 places, and I knew he was mayor. And I think he knew I was a business owner, but we didn't talk politics. We would, we got to know each other a little bit as acquaintances, but not well.
I think it's a little bit more difficult for you, and this just sort of dawned on me as you're somewhat of a public figure prior to coming into this. I mean, you're a business owner, you're very visible in the store, and that's what you know. I mean, any of the other aldermen, I mean, I would have no idea where to get a hold of Rhonda Pindell Charles or Ross Arnett or Fred Payon in the middle of the day.
Right.
Obviously we could look up an address and go knock on a door or something like that, but nobody ever really would do that. I mean, I would think that sort of is a hindrance for you, because you're fair game there.
I think it was a big benefit, because they knew me as a store owner, or some people knew me as coaching, because I've coached my kids for a long time, and so they knew me in some context, just not in that context, so it made it very comfortable. When people come to meet with me, I'm not dressed up in a suit and tie most days. I'm dressed in my work attire with my True Value shirt, and so it was a very comfortable, relaxed conversation most of the times. And people are pretty understanding if you say, I either don't have time. I'll pass on this tidbit I learned. It took me a little while to learn this one. So in the beginning, everyone would try to share their information, and they'd always say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And in the beginning, I thought they really wanted to know what I thought. And so I would try to come up with a policy opinion. It took me a while to realize when people said, what do you think of this? What they were really asking is, ask me what I think of it, because I want to tell you what you should do. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's just like, this is a listening for me event. This is not a talking event for me.
Right. What do you think of medical marijuana? Well, I've got my opinion, so now...
Right. They want to share it.
Was it overwhelming?
In the beginning, it was. It wasn't overwhelming in the sense that I couldn't keep up, but it was overwhelming in the sense that I was meeting so many people and learning about so many issues that I didn't know about. When I am having conversations, I'd like to be able to put it in some context or categorize it. I'm used to this at the store. Someone's calling. I'm assuming they're trying to sell me something, for instance. Yeah. And so trying to categorize it, is this someone that's trying to help me? Is this someone that's trying to help themselves? What's their motivation? And so when I was getting acclimated to the city council work, it was a lot of, what are they really trying to say? What's the question behind the question? What's the context of that they're really concerned about? I know, Tim, that or maybe it was between the two of you, I don't remember who, you often say that environmentalists are really concerned about traffic, and they're using environmental issues as a screen for their concern about traffic issues. And so it was a lot of that kind of analysis.
John on that one.
That's probably me, yeah.
So it was a lot of that kind of analysis.
I don't want them texting me.
Yeah. So that was interesting. My first city council meeting was pretty harmless. It was a nice swearing in. It was a nice little event. But my first meeting after that was probably one of my toughest votes I've ever had since. And that was a vote on whether the city should go to nonpartisan elections. And I had just been selected 2 weeks prior by the Democratic Central Committee. So it was a very awkward position, and I was getting information and arguments on both sides. And frankly, to this day, I still don't know what is the best result. The issue came up a lot in the time leading up to this most recent city election, and I think there's good merit to both. I think there's good reasons to advocate for either one or the other. I really enjoyed when I first joined the council, I'd had these philosophical arguments with myself, for instance, that Josh Cohen always came to those discussions prepared. He always had a strong view, what was right and what was wrong, but he had research. He would be able to give me a policy document and show me what other cities have done, why this is good, why this is bad. And so I enjoyed those philosophical discussions. And sometimes I agreed with them, and sometimes I disagreed, but I enjoyed the debates.
Well, you weren't seeing, and I guess I am pulling back the curtain a little bit, but I mean, you came in without you're obviously Democrat, but you came in without being attached to the Central Committee. You weren't part of the machine, as often said.
I didn't have any allegiances.
So you weren't seen coming in. I guess they were trying to see where you were, because let's be honest, you didn't like the events. You didn't like that everyone's required to go to have their face seen, and because you're a legislative guy, you're a policy guy.
Well, I'm also shy, frankly, and so going to all these events where you're supposed to be engaged and social and upbeat, it's not my comfort zone. So that.
And when I say events, I mean like the fundraisers and the ribbon cuttings and all these sort of things.
But even the non-political events, just the social events that so many of our wonderful organizations do to just get to know each other and advocate. Plus, it was just time management. So I was getting lots of information in about the city council work, and I was getting invited to lots of events, and so I just couldn't do it all. And so I just made the decision I was going to focus on making sure I was prepared for when I needed to vote and come up with a decision. The city council, I think, didn't know me. I didn't know any council members. I think prior to being on the council, I had been to one presentation in Eastport that Ross had given, some group I was involved with. I'm sure he wouldn't remember me.
And you were the new kid who was coming in the middle of the semester, too.
Yeah, exactly. So they had 3 years of they all knew how each other was going to vote on different things, and no one knew how I was going to vote, and I didn't know how I was going to vote. And I wasn't comfortable in voting if I didn't understand something. And so something would have been through the process, and they're getting ready for a vote, and I'm still asking questions. Mm-hmm. And I remember Alicia.
That carried you well through your terms.
Yeah, well, I asked a lot of questions because I took my responsibility seriously, perhaps too seriously, but I didn't feel comfortable approving people, spending money, changing legislation if I didn't know why we were voting on it. And so
you're the most fiscally conservative Democrat I think I've seen.
I was careful about spending the city's taxpayers' money. I felt like too often, and I just saw the county council just did it, where they spent money or reduced revenue in some fashion with no offsets. And just as a business person, that offended me.
So, all right, let's go back a little bit to your first meeting. All right, so you're coming in. It's like your mom dropped you off at school, and she kisses you, sends you on in, and it's all new faces, and you're sitting down at the meeting, and all the alderpersons in the meeting, they know how the meetings go. They know what the system is, and
you glance at the dais and you see that your name is misspelled.
Probably.
So is that? I mean, but again, I mean, you're an attorney, so I mean, litigated, and so for you, I don't think it's like you came in totally cold, but still, I mean, there's a learning curve there when it comes to the meetings. So, and the meetings are famously long, more so. Well, yeah, especially Josh's meetings were famously long.
They were that summer because if you remember, that's when we were focused on the city dock, and so we had some very long hearings and meetings.
1, 2 in the morning sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first meeting, did you just come out of that like, what the hell? I mean, or was it mentally exhausting, or did you have to, brush up on Robert's Rules of Order before you go in, or is it, I mean, all these things?
I did get a little Robert's Rules of Order book, and frankly, last week I met with Mark and I gave it to him, and I said, brush up on this because not many people know.
That's the secret to everything.
Rules. Well, it is good to know the rules. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we have a wonderful city clerk in Regina, so she would keep us on track. But if you knew the rules or you know the rules, you're going to be better off than those who don't. When you could interrupt, when you can't interrupt, when you need a motion, when you need support, you don't need a majority on everything. Mm-hmm. So getting to a final vote, call to order. You don't need a majority vote. Right. End of discussion, period. Go to vote.
Why? Here's a question for you. Why do they sometimes call a voice vote and not?
I think most of the time that is the preference of the chair of the meeting, which for the full city council is the mayor. On third reader, you always need a voice vote to see. But I think other times a voice vote would do it. But if someone's trying to create a record that's awfully clear and hold someone to that record in the future, you do the roll call.
They'll call.
So it's a little bit of grandstanding. It's not grandstanding, but it's
you want to maneuver.
Yeah, you want people to see where the alderpersons stand on a particular issue.
Yep.
And we've had quite a few of those where it's gotten kind of dramatic. I'm trying to think the debates have gotten really hot. I mean, I think the budget debate from this year, which was your 5th year in office, that was the most contentious I've seen on your part. That was when we had the $3 million that was allocated or reprogrammed, I think. And at the end of each one of these line items, you're like, what's the offset going to be? And I remember one of the alderpersons saying, I know we always say that we're going to deal with it in the future and that we kick the can down the road, but we really are going to deal with this down in the future. And you knew you weren't running for a second term or second and a half term, whatever that's going to be. And it was just one of those senioritis moments, like, I don't care if I tick people off, which was, for those of us who watch at home, it's fascinating.
As far as taking people off, and I don't know that I made the right decisions, but I had a number of votes in that first year where it was waiving fees for some group or another, including like the Martin Luther King parade. Right. We're looking for waiver fees. And it just felt to me, because if I was going to have this stance that you don't reduce fees or waive fees without some offset, I need to be consistent. And so I voted against waiving fees. A whole number of organizations that I really like and support and I think do good things for the city. And I think I probably upset a lot of people, including that specific organization I know was unhappy with me. They felt like it was an anti-Martin Luther King vote, where it was really, no, I'm just...
Because everyone who knows you knows how much he drove you nuts. That's...
Yeah, Mark, well...
that guy.
And so I certainly didn't want to be on the bad side of these organizations, and I certainly support their purpose and their causes, but I felt like I needed to be consistent. And I learned later, they were really mad at me for thinking I was against them as a group. But
you were a little bit of a rogue alderman at the first year, because I remember there was one meeting where you were to lead the prayer at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the invocation, and it's not a statement against, similar to my last point. It's not a statement against religion or having religious people involved in government. I think that's we should be accepting and welcome of people of different backgrounds. I just don't like government in my religion or religion in my government.
The same way.
I agree, but I remember it was funny you said there. Said I'd rather have a moment of silence. I think, or you asked for something.
Every invocation, and you get a couple a year. I would do a little nuance. My favorite was when
I wanted to see you lead the wave.
I had been tempted on a number of occasions to do like a Jewish prayer just to be different, but I felt like, no, that's still religion. Don't be hypocritical. My favorite one was...
Well, that's not hypocritical. That's being a nudge.
That too. Which would be ironic, of course. So my favorite was when the PAL Astros won their championship, and they came in and we had a ceremony, and it was a friend of mine that was leading the team, and it happened to be the same night I was doing the invocation. And so I said my sort of non-religious bit, and then instead of the amen, I gave a play ball, and got a nice response. That was fun for me.
I think it's one of those things too that, this is tradition that I guess no one's really thought through, and I think as a newcomer coming in going, well, why do we do this? And I don't think you're doing it for a political statement. Obviously you made a bigger deal about it, but I do know you were apprehensive about it the first time.
I was, and various people were very angry with me that I had done it, and various people who were supporters, like, oh, you just made a big mistake. If you ever run for something again, they're going to use this against you.
Voters have short memories. Someone said it the other day.
You just reminded them about this, so thanks a lot.
Yeah. They said, someone the other day said, voters have long memories. I'm like, voters are like goldfish. They really don't remember things. They just don't. I don't mean that. I'm a voter, but those
John
things
Haskell
just don't
said
stick.
He said, don't put signs up in advance. As you put them 2 weeks before the election, that's when people will remember it. I'm not sure that strategy worked for him this time around, but that's...
So what was your relationship with the other aldermen when you came in? For that, I mean, because I know that you're the new kid, going with the analogy, you're a new kid coming in. So did you realize the importance of forming alliances or whatever, or did you come in with that whole Mr. Smith sort of thing, going, I'm going to have good legislation, put it forward, but then realize that you were going to have to do some wheeling and dealing?
Yeah, there was definitely a learning curve along those lines. My Mike Malinoff was the city manager at the time. He called me in for a sort of meet and greet, and Sheila and Ross were the two alderpersons who came to that meeting. And I remember Sheila giving me a very like a once-over, like, I'm not going to trust you for a while type of response. And she and I, as you know, had our conflicts for that first year and probably spilling into longer. And then we definitely evolved to a point where I think we like each other and respect each other. We still had philosophical disagreements, but I think we personally evolved quite a bit. And Ross and I hit it off pretty well. He was from day one. Let me get onto this tangent if you let me. From day one, that very first meeting, he started badgering me about the need to go to city manager form of government. This was with Josh Cohen as mayor.
Right.
And so throughout the whole fourth year, he'd bring it up. We really need to make this change going into an election year. And so after that election, and of course Mike Panelidis won that election, he again was pushing that issue, but it really was like, no, this is not something that Ross was doing against Mike Panelidis.
The optics were just really...
The optics were horrible.
Yeah.
But the reality was he was pushing this under Josh Cohen. He was pushing this under Mike Panelidis. He was pushing it at the end of a term because it would be better to start. He was pushing it at the beginning of a term because that was the right time. So there was no point where he was inconsistent or targeting because Mike Panelidis was the mayor because he was Republican. And so I felt like he really got a bum rap on that issue. If you let me finish that tangent, throughout this most recent city election, we kept on hearing how the council tried to do a city manager form of government. The council didn't do anything. Ross Arnett was trying to build a coalition, and it never materialized into legislation that got introduced or anything. So anyway.
And the building of coalitions is kind of interesting too, because a lot of that develops, and I think you saw that with Mike's inexperience with the first year, where the famous note and his relationship with council, and that is to say that I think you look at the last few mayors, and they had somewhat of a contentious relationship with council on occasion, and that's kind of by design, even though it's the same party in most cases, but you still have to build coalitions, and I saw with the political naivete of Mike that anyone would have had, frankly, going in, where all of a sudden you realize, I've got to be able to eat crow for this vote because I need their support in another vote. And there's a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that no one tells you about, I think.
One thing that surprised me, I thought there was going to be a lot more wheeling and dealing as far as building coalitions. You vote for this and I'll vote for that. It was something that Josh Cohen, when I was getting introduced to the council, it was something that he advocated not doing. He said, take every vote separate and don't do those wheeling dealings. Treat each vote as its own issue and treat it honestly in that integrity. But I still thought there was going to be that kind of, you scratch my back on this issue and I'll help you on that issue. And there really was at least none of it that I was a part of.
But in all honesty, there was not a whole lot of legislation being generated. I mean, you generated a good amount. Joe Budge, certainly. I can't think of anyone else. They did, but I can't imagine anyone else with the volume. So, it wasn't... I don't think there's that much legislation being generated where it probably necessitate that wheeling and dealing, maybe on a county level or even especially a state level.
On the budget issue,
budget, yeah.
There were some budget amendments. If you remember, I was pushing to have the Hispanic liaison office created, and I got a very negative reaction from Rhonda and Sheila initially to that. And so that evolved into, their first response was, well, if there's a Hispanic liaison, shouldn't there be an African-American liaison? And instead of fighting it, I reached that compromise where we were going to collectively establish and offer both Hispanic and a African-American liaison. And so there was that sort of negotiating collaboration. You quickly learned who was there to compromise, or not even compromise, but just to talk. And I don't mean compromise in a negative way. Who was there that was going to debate the issues and let you know where you stood with them? Joe Budge was fantastic for that. He would let you know early in the process. He would do his homework, and if he disagreed with you, he'd let you know and give you the chance to negotiate to a point where you were both comfortable. And Ross was helpful with that. Ian, I knew. And then some other council members were hard to ever get an answer out of them. And you still didn't know going into the night of the vote how they were going to vote. And so it made it, it made it feel like you might be wasting your time if you were never going to get an answer from that person.
It's funny. So you see, not the bickering, but you see like a little bit of tension from time to time when watching the meetings because of a certain issue or a certain vote. But it was kind of interesting to me when someone from the floor during public comments took a shot at Joe Budge recently, right before the election, I think it was, and Rhonda was livid. It was where she flew back, and she was so upset she was shaking, coming to his defense. And I just thought it was interesting where, you can be in that situation where you're going to be bumping into each other and you have disagreements, but when you feel kind of
I saw that a couple
criticized
times
from the outside, that they jump right into each other's defense.
I saw that a couple times, and I feel very similarly positive about it. I remember Fred getting attacked on his budget offerings, and Sheila kind of trying to calm Fred down. The reverse, I think, happened once as well. I think where Sheila was getting attacked, and I think Rhonda and Fred were both saying, trying to help her keep her cool, although Sheila always keeps her cool. I think there's some level of, we appreciate that everyone there is doing the best they can do, and they might not make people happy sometimes, and they could get emotional about it, but we're doing our best, and give us some slack sometimes.
When you came in, did you identify a mentor on the council? I mean, was there anybody that you would consider your mentor? And I guess my question, which would be applicable to anybody else that's considering running for office at any level, is that an important thing to do?
I felt it was. It was my mentor in a sense was Josh. Like I said, I didn't know very well before joining the council, but he was trying to help get me up to speed. Like I said, we enjoyed philosophical arguments. The conflict was that I often disagreed with where he ended up. And so I respect him a ton as a mayor, a ton as a person, and sometimes I agreed with him and sometimes I didn't. So I really upset him, frankly, on a number of times. I wasn't supporting his initiatives, even though we had that back and forth, and even though he was being so helpful to me as a mentor. But since we saw things differently, that definitely put a strain on some things. Ross and I found our philosophies to be much more aligned. And so I learned a lot from listening to Ross and appreciating his value, his input about trying to be more inclusive. So rather than introduce something with just my name as a sponsor, for instance, try to get as many co-sponsors to begin with, even if I might lose some of the credit, if you will, for introducing it. It was a better approach to actually getting something done.
And how does that actually happen? So the mechanics behind it. So they need sponsors, co-sponsors for a bill. You get a phone call, you get an email, or like during the break, session?
It depends on who the person was. So like Ian and Ross and I often saw things similarly and had the same motivations.
So kind of like a unofficial caucus, that's...
Well, yeah, in a sense. And so we would talk on many issues early in the process. Okay, let's try. Are we going to try to do this together? Yes. Okay, so we're going to try this. And then it was, who else can we pull in? And Ross and Fred have a terrific relationship. So Ross would say, okay, I'll talk to Fred and see if I can get him on board, and so on. Joe was someone, like I said, that was always approachable on these issues, and then we would see where we were with everybody else. I got to the point, though, with almost all legislation I introduced before it came to the full council. Once it was written and ready to go, I would still circulate it by email to the whole council, including the mayor, and saying, does anyone else want to co-sponsor this? I just felt like it was helpful to get people on board early.
What was it? So looking back at your 5 years, is there any moments in the meetings that kind of jumped out at you where that you were either just amazed, infuriated, amused? Because those meetings can go on for hours at a time. So you've got to be...
Yeah, I'm sure there was all of those moments. I think the public hearings are worth kind of talking about for a minute.
They're everyone's favorite.
Because when
Robert Eads starts stepping up to the mic, everyone's like, here we go.
Yeah. So if you remember when Mike Panelidis first took office, Josh had a rule that public comment was only be 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it's actually in the code where there's some discretion. I think it's a default 5 minutes unless you decide as a council it can be 3 minutes.
Okay.
And Mike wanted to continue at 3 minutes, and I think there was some conflict where Sheila said, well, it says 5 minutes. Why aren't you doing it 5 minutes? And Mike was like, I'm not trying to cause any trouble here. You guys decide. And so we ended up going for 5 minutes. And frankly, 5 minutes might seem like not a long amount of time to make your point. But on the other end of hearing comment after comment, if you can't make your good pitch in 3 minutes, you're probably talking too much.
You know what drove me nuts is when someone would make a point, and then everyone would come up in line after that to make the exact same points, because people just want to say what they're going to say. Yeah. No one. I think one time one guy got up and he said, the guy before me just said everything I wanted to. I'm like, you are my hero, dude.
Yep. As long as you sit down after that point and not just then repeat it. So another interesting, I kept on evolving on the value of public hearing in the sense that there'd be some public hearings where you'd have a room full of people, and I could tell you before a single public comment how everyone on the council was going to vote.
Right.
And I felt like, man, this feels like a waste of time because everyone's mind is made up. But honestly, there were many other times, not just one or two, where I thought, you know what? People might have thought they were going to vote a certain way, and this public hearing changed that vote. Or there were smaller public hearings where, I don't mean small in the sense of size, it's just as far as fewer people speaking on a particular issue, where we were not aware of a certain problem or an issue, and that public hearing was very helpful to say, oh, I wasn't aware that was going on, or that's a problem, that's something we should follow up on. So my thought process on how valuable those public hearings shifted many times throughout my term.
Some of them are a lot of fun. I mean, you have a lot of the frequent flyers who are up there that, but like I said, whenever Robert came up, I mean, it was going to be the Robert and Mike show, and that was always going to be fun. One
thing I definitely learned, and this is what I tell like Walter Vasquez or other groups who are trying to have a bigger say, is there's a huge value to being a representative. So whether it's play with a sport with 50 other people, but being able to say, I'm here and I represent 50 people, 100 people, or I have 150 people sign this petition like Park Place people did a couple times. That was pretty impactful. Mm-hmm. Versus saying I
don't take away their free shuttle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what the topic was. And I'm not saying someone can't be persuasive coming there by themselves, but not a lot of people come to city council meetings, frankly. And so the few people who show up and say something, they get listened to. So I encourage public participation.
You're one of the, from my opinion anyhow, one of the more persuasive and conversive aldermen out there. I mean, you were always, your newsletter, you were always available and whatnot. And one thing that you put in your newsletter, I know Ross does as well, I think Joe as well, says, unless I can be convinced otherwise, this is how I'm going to vote. Something along those lines. Do you get responses from those, and do you get swayed?
Let's start at the beginning. First, I got the idea of doing that from Ross. I think he was my example of what I was going to try to do. I thought he did a nice job with that sort of phrase, and I changed it to make it more my own. To answer your question, yes. Obviously not every issue, but I would get some people that would respond just to say, I like the direction you're leaning and just want to let you know, yes, please vote the way that you said you would. And I would also get people saying, I like this part about your vote on here, and I don't like this part, and back and forth. It wasn't hundreds of emails, but it was a steady, to each email I would send out, I would get a steady response.
And they could potentially sway your...
Yes. This was something else I had to figure out, and it's hard to figure out before you're in office, but I had to figure out when was I going to vote based on what I thought was right, and when was I going to vote based on what the public wanted me to do.
That's the biggest question in elective office.
And so, yeah, it is an important question to answer for yourself.
I look at, what's his name, up in Maine, the Governor King up in Maine, where, for example, I think they just had a mandate to expand Medicare, and they are Medicaid. And so it was a referendum, and the voters voted for it, and the governor said, no, we're not doing it. I'm going to. And so that brings up that question that I think is perennial for anyone who's elected to office. Was I elected because they trust my judgment and they see me as a free thinker, or am I elected to just enact the mandate of the people who voted for me?
I think exactly. I think that question comes up over and over again, and there were some issues that I was never going to be convinced, say, to vote against the school capacity ordinance. But I could be talked into compromise positions where we could carve out something that might be reasonable. A good example for me was one of our very last votes when all the Democratic council members introduced legislation that would have changed who the city attorney reports to, whether the city manager or the mayor. I think it made sense to have the city attorney report to the city manager for a number of reasons. But the public clearly did not agree with that. And I thought in that instance, it was more important that the public have their say, and the majority was not convinced, or the majority that spoke up thought this was bad legislation, then it was the wrong time to pass that legislation.
All right, so we were in the final year of the cycle. So you're watching all your brethren who are running for re-election. How much of a distraction do you think that is? Because you have the luxury of not having to do that. So you could concentrate on legislation.
How much what?
And you have to concentrate on re-election.
Yeah.
So do you think...
I don't think it was a big distraction. I think it changed a few votes, frankly. I think some of the legislation that we got passed, like the adequate public facilities ordinance, like the no net loss trees, does not get passed in year one of this term. It just, even the same exact legislation, but they knew that voters were watching because the election was coming up, and so we got a few more votes for those two pieces of legislation than I think we would have in any time.
That's no different than the different initiatives. I mean, we got dog parks, we got kid parks, we got the mayor certainly had a number of things that he could do in the last 6-8 weeks before the election.
Well, I kind of always thought that, and maybe not at a municipal level, but certainly county, state, and federal, is that the first half of your term is appeasing your donors, and the second half is appeasing the voters. And it's a delicate balance for the most part.
I think to answer your question,
not that
it really
it's mutually
depends on the person.
exclusive, but it's...
Joe Budge, for instance, I think, like me, I think Joe tried to vote and make the most use of his time and vote for what he thought was right, even if it was going to upset voters and be bad for him in an election year. But he really tried his best to just do what was right, whereas I think other people were more focused on getting reelected. So I think it just depends on the person, on how they handled that. And frankly, it obviously didn't work out well for Joe to be focused on what he thought was right at the cost of losing him the election.
That one surprised me, actually, to be honest with you. I didn't. I mean, I thought Ellie had a great campaign. I thought that it was going to be close, but I didn't think that. I thought Joe was. He's not someone that I hear a whole lot of criticism about. So I was a little surprised that he was unseated.
You know, in hindsight, I'm not so surprised because there were a couple issues that affect Ward 1, specifically the historic preservation group, that were really upset with him. I was surprised because I see how hard Joe works and how thoughtful and intelligent of a person he is. And he, over and over, was one of the architects or the architect of major legislation, and he was really invested in doing the best job he could. But, you know, he clearly upset a couple of constituencies with some of those actions and paid the price for it at the polls.
Are you surprised that you didn't see any mayoral candidates come out of council? That surprised me.
Yes. Yeah, if you asked me 2-3 years ago who was going to run...
I thought it was everybody.
Joe and Ross.
I thought Sheila.
And Sheila. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think they each probably could describe different reasons why they didn't run. But yeah, I'm surprised that you're right. I didn't really think about that, but you're right. No council members...
Well, we went to... I can count 4 without even thinking about it who were at least considering it and at least floated that out there.
Right.
And then in the end, it wasn't even like a final decision. It just, for the last year, I think the decision was made.
I think you have to give Mike credit for being a strong candidate. And then you also have to give Gavin, obviously, a ton of credit for overcoming that.
Right.
But I think some council members just made the calculation, I can't be Mike in an election.
Which is interesting.
It could, yeah. I think he seemed like a year ago. I thought Mike had a really good chance of re-election.
I did too. Yeah.
And I didn't know what candidate was going to be able to beat him. And I think a lot of council members made that calculation. So hats off to Gavin for not being either intimidated or swayed by that point of view and capturing it.
We were saying this too. We said this a couple times. It kind of water finds its own level when it comes to Annapolis voters. Is that if you look at the numbers that came out and the way that Gavin won, it's kind of like that might be the natural order of things, you know. And that said, I thought Mike he had a great campaign. He was
Mike's a very good campaigner.
Yeah, it was very strategic. I didn't see any blunders. I mean, we talk about the flyers, but that didn't lose it for him. But it didn't help. But I think that's probably a testament to him, the fact that you didn't have anyone come out of council because they just thought, well, he's going to be formidable.
Mike was raising a lot of money every year he was in office. He raised more money, so he had a huge war chest, and that could be intimidating. And that could be. It just is. Frankly, if you're going to run a campaign, you've got to raise some money. Gavin proved that you don't need to raise more money than your opponent, but you still need to raise a substantial amount of money.
Did you consider it?
No, not seriously. I mean, I consider it in the sense that in my mind, I've had lots of discussions with myself in my own head about what would I do as mayor and what would I want to do. And frankly, if you remember, let me get off on this tangent, the same year I joined the council.
We have no format. So
right, good. That's right. You didn't even tell me what we were going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. So in January, I joined the city council. In December, it was December, I joined the True Value Board as a corporate director. So after like 10, whatever that is, 11 months of getting an education of city council work, I started getting an education of what it is to be a corporate director. And frankly, the roles as a director are very, very similar as a council member in that they both are oversight bodies. You have to learn to not dive into the details of things you want to dive into the details on because you're not the executive side. You're not the executive branch. And so you can't nitpick every little decision. You got to stay at a higher, the 10,000-foot view. And so when I joined joined the board, the company had just gotten a new CEO, had done this massive strategic planning process that I got to be a part of as a board member. And so I really got to see, wow, they gave me lots of ideas. Well, if I was mayor, this is what I would do, and this is how I would approach it, and this is how I would try to be more collaborative, inclusive, try to build support from the ground up, get more knowledge out of the existing city employees because they've been there for 20, 30 years. In a lot of cases, they know what problems exist. They know how to solve them, frankly. And so I had all these ideas and conversations with myself about what I would do as mayor. That said, I knew I didn't have any near the amount of time required to do the job right, and I wasn't going to do it without having the time available.
But we've had a lot of people ask.
You talked about the time doing the things right, and one of the things that we did when we talked to everybody in the crab cakes with the aldermen, we said, hey, how much time are you planning to put into this thing? And I remember my very first interview.
People lied to you.
Well, they did. Well, I mean, my very first interview with James Appel, he said, I'm totally prepared for about 15 hours a month. And I, just knowing what you put in and what everybody has put in, I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of a low ball.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was contemplating joining the council, I was touch and go whether it was actually, I put my name in and then I was tempted to retract it because I was worried about the time involved. And I talked to lots of people who said I could do it within 15 hours a month, and they lied to me.
Who are their names?
Yeah, they know who they are if they're listening to this. But so you can do it in 15 hours per month, but you're not going to do a very good job. You're not going to be able to have the time to either be responsive to your constituents or just people who, whether they're constituents or not, people who are contacting you by email, phone, store visits from me. Or you're not going to have done your research on issues you're going to have to vote on.
And they're not just your constituents. I mean, you also have developers and people going, hey, we could really use your support on it. No, we want to talk to you about
advocacy groups.
Right. Hell yeah.
Yeah. Lots of people want your time. And so you could say no to all those people and show up to the council meetings and your committee meetings in 15 hours a month. You just won't be well prepared.
How much time did you put in, would you guess? It
is a guess for me because with all of my responsibilities, I would flow from one thing to the next all of my waking hours, frankly. And so, I'm mixing in all my different jobs, my personal stuff, my coaching, and emails for one, then emails for the other. And
raise your kids for a couple minutes a day.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really hard for me to guess. I estimate that it was between 15 to 20 hours a week. And there were some weeks that was probably a little bit more, like when I was in the Forest Conservation Act, we had like a 6-hour meeting every Friday for a while.
Sure. You forget about the committee meetings. People forget that you have the committee meetings as well.
Right. And the committee meetings would take less time, but especially the meeting that I'm the chair of, I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to have a sense of what was going to happen. I'm not all free-form like you guys are here, not knowing where things are going to go.
Well, because you actually don't mind the work. We're a little lazier.
So it's not the 12 hours a month for the meetings that we...
No, and that was with me trying to stay out of the details that I felt like we need to stay out of. And that's something else that took me a little while to figure out. What's my job as council member? And I finally realized that it's 3 things. 1, passing a budget that reflects the priorities of the city government and what people want. 2 is changing the code and passing legislation as needed. And then an additional thing on that end that took me a couple of years to learn is just because you pass legislation doesn't mean it's effectuated. You actually then have to follow up and make sure the people who are supposed to do certain things with that legislation are actually doing those things. And I don't mean in any nefarious way, but a lot of our employees work very hard, and something new doesn't always get implemented correctly or in time. And then the third thing is your oversight of the city manager. So is the city manager the right person for the job? Does he need to get replaced, or does he need just goals set and priorities set? That's mostly reflected in the budget. But really try to stick to those three things. Don't get into how many people, when you see three people on a job on a public works project on the side of the road and you feel like that's too many or too few, it's not your business.
That's not your job.
Yeah. Stay away from those issues as much as possible.
So you done
with
public office?
I don't think so. I'm not trying to be coy or misleading in any sense. I truly don't know what the answer is.
He's a politician. Look at that.
My current state is I don't know. And so, I still have these other jobs. I think what I do know is that I will not run for office again while I'm still on a board of directors. So if I separated from being a board of directors, if I resigned, then I would free up some time and responsibilities. Because frankly, the board meets 5 times a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but say for any of the state positions like delegate.
Because you're traveling for that.
Yeah. And so
3 days.
The 3 months that the delegates and the senators are in full-time mode, I would have a board meeting for 2 of those weeks, and you couldn't just take off for 2 weeks, and that wouldn't be fair to the constituency
or the board.
Or the board, right? I couldn't miss a board meeting, and I couldn't miss 2 weeks of delegate. So that is something I think about, whether I should step away from the board and run for something, but I haven't figured that out yet.
So you got to move a piece before you do anything.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 4 jobs was too much. I need to get down to 3 jobs.
Oh, you baby.
So we're probably going to see you on a ballot at some point, somewhere down the line.
I think so.
I wouldn't be surprised, Joe.
It wouldn't be. It could be not for another 5 to 10 years when I might be in a role where I am spending less time with my day job at True Value.
And then, of course, your marriage did survive this one. Your
my
kids
marriage
still
survived.
Remember who you are.
They do. Although for a number of years, my son, Zach, has been looking forward to Hanukkah, Christmas time of 3rd grade, because I told him apparently years ago, by Hanukkah of when you're in 3rd grade, I'll be done with this job.
that's where he puts his
exactly.
So you finally got your Hanukkah special out of it.
Exactly.
It's a Hanukkah miracle.
That's right.
That's awesome. Hey, real quick before we go, we're wrapping up now, right, Tim?
Yeah.
You're looking at the time clock? Okay. 2 things, and make them very succinct. What is coming out of your time in office, your 2 terms, what is your biggest success?
Some of the legislation I passed, I'm very proud of. That was
one legislation piece that you passed?
Adequate public facilities.
Okay, stop.
Took 20 years to pass.
Adequate public facilities. We stop.
I'm going to add on. The Forest Conservation Act has been a mess since 1992, and we finally, I think, got that tackled.
Okay, and what is your biggest disappointment coming out? And not necessarily with
that's
legislation.
Easy, actually.
Agreeing to come on the show?
Well, that's obvious.
Not being able to get that dentist's piece of land for 6
No, I got him
months?
that piece of land finally. It took 5 years, but we got him that piece of land.
That poor guy.
So one of the hardest things about being an alderman, if I look at what's the most crucial issues to the city long term, 5-10 years from now, what are we going to look back on? I'd say sea level rise is high on that list. Managing the budget in a responsible manner, and public safety. So number 1 for me, I just said sea level rise. I didn't spend nearly the amount of time on that issue that I would have liked to do because I got focused on other things that we've talked about in our various podcasts. So that's my biggest regret, that I couldn't balance. I couldn't say, these issues might be small in comparison to sea level rise, but I can't push it aside just because it's a smaller issue.
Alderman Jared Littmann.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is awesome. And
appreciate the questions.
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to text you during these council meetings anymore to try and distract you.
Well, you still can. I just won't be distracted at a city council meeting by them. And so those random laughs or chuckles.
You could be at home playing Words with Friends or something like that.
There were a few instances where someone's giving very serious public hearing testimony about a very serious topic, and you would send me something, and it would just
it was in my drinking time. Yes,
so exactly. So I had to kind of bury my face.
Your public works trash truck ran over my little kitten this morning.
Right, yeah. There were a few of those.
Thank you very, very much.
I appreciate it.
Good luck and everything else that you do, and we'll see you on the flip side, I guess.
Thank you.
Flip side.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.